Everybody, we are holding on the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amid Aleph, all the way on the bottom, literally the second to last line. Okay, so the Gemara, now today's Gemara, the first half to the end of the parak is kind of difficult. We'll try to get it through it. And then the start of the new parak is just simply very factual stuff about how do you roast the carbon Pesach, and that's much more simple. And that's simply data. So just to go over, slightly before, at the two dots, about 10 lines higher, on 73, on 73a, it would be in 73a2. It just said over there, Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. This is back at the two dots, about 10 lines above where we're starting today, just to give you Agdama. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Asham Shenitak L'Riyah, an asham that was consigned for grazing. The story was as follows, that somebody had to bring an asham, and either he brought another asham, he found a better behemoth to bring, so this one became extra, or he himself passed away. Either way, we say that what do? We send this, the asham gets sent to be grazed, and it gets a blemish, we sell it, and we use the money that we get from there for donated oilers. Now, the Gemara says over here, asham shenitak l'riyah, an asham that was put aside for grazing, v'shachta stam, and somebody just simply shechted it, slaughtered it with non-specific purposes, automatically it became kosher li-oiler, became automatically good for an oiler. And the Gemara said, you see from here, from Rav Huna Amar Rav, Alma Kesava Loi Boya Akira. You don't need conscious uprooting of its name from a shlomim to an oilah. It happens automatically. Since it no longer can be an asham, since it can no longer be an asham because another animal was used as an asham, therefore, if you slaughter it just like that, it automatically becomes the oilah of which it's about to become anyways. So on this, asks the Gemara. This is where we are, 2 lines from the bottom, 73a4. Eisvei Rav Chizda Rav Huna. Rav Chizda asked Rav Huna, this, he says, how could you say this? Rav Huna Amar Rav. He says like this, our Mishnah said, Shachtu v'noide shemashchu bailim es yodam. If somebody slaughtered the Pesach on Shabbos, and after the fact he found out that all the owners withdrew from the animal, and therefore the animal itself is now no good for a Korban Pesach, because a Korban Pesach is only slaughtered in order to be eaten, and now that nobody's registered on it, it's it's no longer worthy to be eaten. So the question then is, what does this guy have to bring a chatas, a sin offering, for having slaughtered an animal that at the end of the day was not a Pesach because nobody's registered on it? Good. So now we're on 73b1. Says the Gemara, V'tane Allah, and the Gemara says over there, V'tane Allah, and we said over there in our Mishnah that he's not liable for a chatas for having done this on Shabbos, because at the time that he slaughtered it, he had the right to assume that the people who registered on it are still registered on the animal. Great. Now we're on 73b1. V'tani Allah, and the Brisa said, regarding this Mishnah, B'chol, in the weekdays, ki hai gavna, if it was such a case, in the weekdays, Yisraf miyad, you need to burn the Pesach right away. Why? Because the Pesach intrinsically is no good. Since the Pesach was slaughtered with nobody actually registered on it, it's completely possible, no good as a Pesach. In the weekdays, you would have to burn it immediately. So now the Gemara says, why do you burn it immediately? If you say, Bishlema, good, all good, Baya, Bishlem, Baya, Akira, that you need a conscious uprooting. When you want to remove something from one classification of sacrifice to another classification of sacrifice, you need to have a conscious thought about it. It doesn't happen automatically. Hi Pesachu, this Pesach, right? Since now it has no owners, because all the owners removed themselves, it's a disqualification in the essence of the animal, in the offering itself, because by definition the whole carbon base is only brought to be eaten. You slaughtered an animal unbeknownst to you that no longer had any owners registered on it. Therefore, the animal itself is no good as a Pesach, so it is intrinsically no good. Therefore, if you say it's intrinsically no good, therefore, on account of this, it makes sense to burn it immediately during the weekdays, of course. But if you hold the way Rav Huna Beg Amarav said, that you don't need a conscious uprooting, it's an automatic uprooting. In such a case, Mereisha, therefore, Havile Shlomim, it became a Shlomim. The moment that the owners left, took themselves off the animal, unbeknownst to the one who's slaughtering it, the moment he slaughtered it, automatically it now becomes a shalomim. We've had this before, because in essence a carbon Pesach really is a shalomim, except that it is set aside for a Pesach. Without this, it becomes automatically a shalomim. Psule mashumai. Then why is it puzzle? Why is it no good? Let it be a perfectly good shalomim. When, in other words, if I don't have to consciously switch it from a Pesach to a Shlomim, only that the circumstances behind it make it happen, then in this case, when unbeknownst to the slaughterer, to the shaykhit, all the owners left, at the moment that he slaughtered it, he wasn't actually slaughtering a Pesach, he was slaughtering a Shlomim. So why isn't it any good? The answer is, Mishum davar achat. There's another problem here. Because by definition, it was slaughtered after the afternoon tamid. How do I know this? Because a carbon Pesach is always slaughtered, is the one carbon that is always slaughtered after the afternoon tamid. Every other carbon, every other sacrifice is not allowed to be done after the afternoon tamid. The afternoon tamid ends the day's avodas, ends the day's service, except for a carbon Pesach. Since the guy who slaughtered it assumed it was a carbon Pesach, when did he slaughter it? He slaughtered it after the tamid shel beino abayim, after the tamid of the afternoon. Well, even though it turned into a shlomim, even if you want to argue that it turned into a shlomim automatically when the owners left it, even unbeknownst to the one who slaughtered it, automatically turned into a shlomim, it would turn out, therefore, he slaughtered a shalomim after the tamid shel beino abayim, and that, of course, is no good, right? But in that case, where somebody slaughters a shalomim after the tamid shel beino abayim, after the afternoon tamid, the rule is you don't burn it right away. You need that the meat should change its appearance. It needs to start rotting. Once it starts rotting, then it could be burnt. The time, because we learned, Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule. Kol shepesuloi begufai, any invalid offering that's puzzled in its essence, in the guf itself, Yisrael miyad gets burned immediately, but bidam ubebaylim, if the problem is not in the animal, but the problem is in the dam. For example, after the slaughtering, while they were carrying the blood towards the altar, the blood spilled, so now you can't finish doing all four. If you remember, there are four avodas: slaughtering, shchita, kabbalah, receiving the blood, halicha, carrying the blood, and zerika, spritzing the blood onto the altar. So in the period, let's say, of halicha, of carrying the blood to the altar to be spritzed, the blood falls, you can't complete the avodah, you can't complete the service, it becomes no good. Ubibailim, or the owners, for an example, if the owners became tamei, right, in the case of a carbon Pesach, right, that becomes no good. But in those cases, the problem isn't in the animal, the problem is in outside variable. When it's an outside variable, the appearance has to change. The appearance has to change. And only then does it go out to the place of burning. So now you see, the Bryce is saying that when there's that the Pesach should be burned immediately. Remember, the previous Bryce has said that it should be, since it doesn't have Bailim, right? It's a psul beguf. It's a psul in itself, in essence of the carbon. It should be burnt right away. It means that it should be burnt right. That means if you hold that it's burnt right away, it means that it never left its classification as a Pesach. Because if it automatically left its classification as a Pesach, that means without a conscious uprooting, it's an automatic uprooting. If it became a shalomim you don't burn unless it changes this meat changes its appearance. Since over here you said that it should be burnt immediately, even before the meat changes its appearance, by definition it means that the Pesach never changed its classification. Isn't that proof that that it requires a conscious uprooting? It requires akira. It requires a conscious uprooting. And a conscious uprooting, that's a different book than Rabbi Zai. We have a question on Rabbi Huna Marav, who said you don't need a conscious uprooting. So now we're on 73b2. So it says the Gemara, you're right. We're going to have to learn what we said. Elo loy tema. Do not say before the way we learned Rav. Shechatu stam, that he slaughtered this asham that was designated to be put. This asham that was designated to be put in a to be for grazing. This asham that was set for grazing, that you slaughtered stam, that we said it became that it's okay. What he called elo loitem it shachtu stam basal l'shum oilo, that you slaughtered it with no attention, with non-specific attention to become an oilo. Amos say straight up, shechatu l'shum oilo, that no, if you designate it for grazing and it didn't actually graze yet, this asham, and I say specifically that this is going to be used for an oilo, then it's kosher. So you see that even Rav is really saying that you do need a conscious uprooting. You need it to, in order to go from an asham to an oilo, you actually have to say the words, I am slaughtering this l'shum oilo, for the use of an oilo. Then it becomes kosher.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Daddy. We can hear you.
Where you
We're holding 73b2. 73b2 in the left-hand column. Okay? I am Gimel Amid Beis, number 2 in the art scroll. Alma Boy Akira. Okay? Alma Boy Akira. Yeah, I got it very good. Alma, very good. We can't see you, Daddy, but we know you're there. Alma Boy Akira. Okay? What do you see from here? By definition, we just now said that according to everyone now, you do need a conscious uprooting. In other words, to turn this asham into an oila, you actually have to say, I'm slaughtering it for the sake of an oila. Regarding a Pesach, which the owners left, you would have to say, I am slaughtering this now for a shalomim. That's where we're holding. We're saying an unconscious uprooting is not an uprooting. To change its classification, you have to consciously change its classification. Says the Gemara, Alma Bo'i Akira, but then we got a problem from the Rav Chia bar Gamdo. The Omar Rav Chia bar Gamdo, Nizraka Mipi Chabura Ba'amri. The following response was given unanimously to everybody in the yeshiva, Kegoin, like before our Mishnah, back on Sabbath Gimel Amid Aleph on 63a, which said also, which made it clear that an animal's designation needs a conscious uprooting. That's in the case where the owners became tamei from a mace. And what's the din when it becomes tamei from a mace? Nitchin the Pesach Sheni. It becomes, they get pushed to Pesach Sheni. That means this animal right now, this Pesach animal can still remain a Pesach animal. It's just not going to be used on Yud Daled Nisan. it's going to be used a month later on Yud Dalet Iyar, right? It could be pushed till the next month. Memela, without akira, without a conscious uprooting, it remains, it never becomes shlomim. It cannot become a shlomim because we're talking about Tamas Meis. The rule is, what's Pesach Sheni for? For those who are distant or become Tameh. For those who become Tameh, automatically their chiyuv of carbon Pesach moves over from Erev Pesach to a month later to Yud Dalet Iyar. So now this carbon Pesach, which they thought they were going to bring today on Yud Dalet Nisan, they're now being told you can bring this when Yud Dalet Iyar a month later because you're Tameh, which means that it retains its classification of what? Of a Pesach, because it's still a valid Pesach. It just could be brought in a month from now. So unless I specifically uproot it and say, no, I'm not going to use this for a Pesach, I'm now going to use it for a Shlomim, it's going to remain with the name Pesach. Here it makes sense. That obviously requires an akira, an uprooting. But in a normal, regular case, if I don't bring the carbon today, or the asham, which is now an extra asham, which ultimately cannot be used anymore as an asham. It can only be used ultimately as an oila. In such a case, if I do it stam, just by itself, it wouldn't need a conscious uprooting. Because the only place where I need a conscious uprooting, by definition, the only place where I need a conscious uprooting is only where the carbon is still
viable.
It's still a good carbon. In other words, the Pesach Rishon just became a Pesach Sheni. It still could be used on, it's still perfectly classified as a Pesach. It can't be used on Yud Dalet Nisan, it'll be used on Yud Dalet Iyar. But the Asham can no longer be used because we already used a different Asham, or the owner passed away. So therefore it can only ultimately be used as an oila. So if I do it stam, even without a conscious
automatic
uprooting, the uprooting takes place automatically. What are you going to say? We just finished learning that according to everybody, no, you need a conscious uprooting. So says the Gemara, what are we talking about over here? Where somebody designated the Pesach correctly before the midday of the 14th of Nisan, of Erev Pesach. That's when you're supposed to designate an animal for Pesach. But the owners that were registered on the Pesach unfortunately passed away after Chatzos. So now you have a very interesting thing regarding this animal. It's a hybrid. It's got two things. On the one hand, it was assigned as a Pesach, perfectly good, Nira. It was good. It was done before Chatzos. There were owners on it. It's a male. It's less than a year old. The Nidcha, but after Chatzos, when the owners who were registered on it passed away, then it became no good. So therefore it says the Gemara, there's an halacha b'chol hanira v'nidke, anything that was once fit to go up on the altar and now is not fit to go on the altar, shuv ein chayze b'nira, can never go ahead and become fit again, even though the animal is here. It's alive and well. It's alive and well. Or in this case, it was slaughtered. It was slaughtered after Chatzos, but there are no owners. In such a case, it can never go up on the altar, and it needs to be burnt immediately. So over here, therefore, if that's the case, we're not talking about over here whether somebody was oiker or not oiker, that somebody uprooted or didn't uproot, conscious or not conscious. It's got nothing to do with it. It doesn't have anything to do with our argument. But says the Gemara, that can't be good. Midi hu detama el. But this reason only works out according to Rabbi Huna Amarav, who's saying essentially what he called, who said before the original version of Rab's thing, that what he called that the Asham automatically turns into a Shlomim, right? It's no longer, it's not a problem. Over there, we're dealing with a situation where you have no other choices, that's what happens. Over here, once it's nidcha, it's nidcha. In other words, since the osham can no longer be used as an osham, it's pushed off from being an osham. It loses its status of an osham because the rule is shuv ein chayzer v'nira. Once it's nidcha, once it has, even though the osham was once good to being an osham, but then we brought another animal instead as the osham, so now this one is no good. It's not fit anymore. Once it's not fit anymore for an osham. So now it automatically takes on a new label. That's not a question of being uprooting. That's just a fact of life. The fact of life is once something has been pushed off, it's pushed completely. It now has to have a completely new classification. That is not even regarding, that has nothing to do with what you think, whether you require to do a conscious uprooting or not. So pray to Gemara, midu the tama el Rab. That works out to Rab. But Rab says, Baalei Chayim einoi nitchin. He says, Baalei Chayim are not nitchin, which means like this. In other words, when we say dochyu, that it's unfit, that it's been pushed, that's only after shechita. That means after you slaughtered it correctly. Then the problem arises. I slaughtered it for the name of that it was classified for. Then whatever problem arose, then the owners passed away. Then the owners became tamei, or something happened. Okay? So there, over here, by the Pesach, that means that the owners, after you slaughtered the Pesach, the owners died or became tamei, right? So there we don't have a problem, right? Or they're not mine on it. In other words,
but here it's alive.
In our case, where it's happening before the Pesach, think about it. Before the Pesach was slaughtered. The Pesach was before Chatzos, before midday. We said this is going to be a Pesach. Comes 6.5 hours, 7 hours, and now we're ready to slaughter the animal. At the moment that we're ready to slaughter the animal, unfortunately, the owners became tamei. They passed away. They took themselves off the animal. They unregistered from the animal. So it turns out that before the animal was killed, before the animal was killed, the problems with it already occurred. Since the problems already occurred while it was alive, says Rab, if it's alive and we haven't done the slaughtering yet, and then arises the problem. So for an example, on the Pesach, if on the Pesach, in other words, before I slaughtered it, the owners took themselves off, they deregistered, or they passed away, or they got tamei, right? Now it's not pushed away. Now it could become a shlomim. Now it could become a shlomim according to Rab. Why doesn't it become a shlomim? Now we got the problem. Ela Amar Rab Papa, Hamani, which we were talking about over here, this price is Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer Udiyama, V'chein, and also Hashoyichet Acherim L'Shem Pesach. If you take other zevachim, for example, if you take a shlomim and you slaughter it for the name of a Pesach, puzzle. It's no good. It becomes invalid. So according to this opinion, even if the Pesach automatically became a shlomim, right? Even if it became automatically a shlomim, it would have to be burnt immediately because of psula in the guf. Because this is what's going on. According to Rabbi Eliezer, when the Baalim are no longer counted on this animal, immediately the Pesach becomes a shlomim. Automatically, it becomes a shlomim. If it automatically becomes a shlomim, that means it was a shlomim that wasn't slaughtered for the name of a shlomim. It becomes a shalomim l'shem Pesach. It became a shalomim that was now slaughtered for the name of a Pesach. Since it was a covered Pesach that no longer has anybody registered on it, according to Rabbi Eliezer, automatically it becomes a shlomim. But now that I'm shechting it in the name of a covered Pesach, because the guy doesn't know, the slaughterer doesn't know that there are no more owners, it turns out that he slaughtered a shlomim for the name of a Pesach. And if you slaughter it for the shlomim in the name of a Pesach, it becomes possible. It becomes possible completely in its own guf, in its essence. And it becomes possible in its own guf. you have to burn it right away. So we have a weird case over here. It is a carbon Pesach, but the owners went off of it. So the owners went off of it, it becomes automatically a shlomim according to Rabbi Eliezer. The problem is the slaughterer doesn't know that the owners went off. So he goes out and slaughters it for the name of a Pesach because it was a Pesach 5 minutes ago. Nonetheless, automatically it became a shlomim. Now you slaughtered a shlomim for the name of a Pesach. You slaughtered for the name of a Pesach. It becomes possible. It becomes possible. It's a problem in the animal itself. It's a problem in the animal itself. It needs to be burnt right away. Says the Gemara, "V'i Rabbi Eliezer chatas nami mechayiv." Then, if that's the case, if it was Shabbos and he slaughtered it, and it turns out he ended up slaughtering a shlomim for the name of a Pesach, but the fact is it's really a shlomim, he should also have to bring a chatas, a sin offering. The whole Leslie Rabbi Eliezer Torah b'dvar mitzvah potter, because we learned yesterday or 2 days ago that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold from Torah b'dvar mitzvah. He says if you make a mistake, you make a mistake, and you have to bring a sin offering. So how could you say this is talking about Rabbi Eliezer when over here it's as clear as day? Nobody's mentioning anything about a chatos. It says the Gemara Elamai, the Targuma Elatagma, Rabbi Yosef Berei, the Rab Salah, Chasidik Hamei, the Rav Papa. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rab Salah Chasidik, explained the Baraisa to Rav Papa like this: Hamani, who's this Baraisa? Yosef ben Chonai. Titznan Yosef ben Chonai Oimer. He said as follows: Hanishach to l'shem Pesach u'l'shem Chatas Psula. Regular sacrifices that are sacrificed for the sake of a Pesach or for the sake of a sin offering are invalid. Alma Psula begufehu. You see, therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Chonai, that a Pesach which becomes automatically a Shlomim, according to Rit, as Rab says, if he slaughters it as a Pesach, it becomes valid in itself. It's an invalidation in the animal itself. Umishumachi Yisaref Miyadam, he said if it's an invalidation in the animal itself, it gets burned right away. But with regarding having to bring a carbon chatos, regarding to having to bring a sin offering, on this, Rab will hold like Rabbi Yeshua that Torah b'devar mitzvah. If you make a mistake in the attempt of doing a mitzvah, in this case, in the attempt of bringing the carbon Pesach on Yud Dal Nisan on Erev Pesach, you're putting that will let you off the hook. You don't have to bring a sin offering. So you do have to burn it right away, because at the end of the day, because there are no more owners, the animal automatically becomes a shlomim. The shoichet, the slaughterer, doesn't know this, so he slaughters it b'shem Pesach. By doing that, it's a shlomim that was slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach. It's possible. It's a psul in the animal itself, so you have to burn it right away. But with regard to the din of a sin offering, we say no. Since your machshavas were all for good, your thought processes was to bring a carbon Pesach. It's good. It's okay. You're off the hook. We're almost at the end of this. Rabbi Ashi says, Rab follows the view of Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika. The Tanya, Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika, says regarding one who slaughters a Pesach on Shabbos. It's Erev, like this year, Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, and he slaughters the carbon Pesach, and then he finds out after the fact that the owners are no longer registered on it. They took themselves off. Right? In Yesho Bayoim, if there's still time in the day to slaughter that day, at the time there was enough time in the day, if there was enough time in the day, in other words, you were one of the first groups. At hour number 7, you slaughtered the animal. So there was enough time for you to do a little research to find out if the owners are still alive, to see that if they're tamei or not, or if they're still registered on the animal or not. If there was time, chayiv, you have to bring a carbon chatas, a sin offering, to have slaughtered this animal on the Shabbos. But still, you have to wait until it changes appearance, it starts rotting. And then you go, you cannot burn it right away. My timer, why not? Is it because it does not require a conscious uprooting Rather, it happens automatically. By definition, it turns into a shlomim. So the Tana, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan Beroika, supports Rab's view that it happens automatically, that you don't have to consciously do it when it loses its status of the classification it currently is, like this case of the Pesach, since nobody is on it, or the owners became Tomei or passed away, therefore there's nobody on the animal, it automatically cannot be a Pesach, automatically becomes a Shlom. We are now on 73b4. So pray to Gemara Mimai, who says that that's what Rabbi Shmuel ben Yochai says, that an animal changes automatically. It's an akira, an automatic akira, an automatic uprooting. Maybe it's because he holds like the Tana de Rabba Barabua that says, Afilu pigul nami bir tzura. Even the case of pigul, which is when somebody has a thought during the avodah, during the shechita, that he's going to eat this animal after its time allotment. Usually you're allowed to eat an animal a day, a night, a day, and he says, I'm going to eat it 2 days later, right? And he's not, the animal becomes puzzle automatically. This Tana says becomes puzzle in its goof. It becomes puzzle intrinsically. Still, this Tana says it still has to change appearance. You can't burn it right away. The Yolif, because he learns, he learns from a Gzeir Shabbat by Pigel, it says Oboin, and iniquity, and it says iniquity also by Noisa, by leftover meat that left over its time, which has to be burnt. So Rabbi Yishmael agrees with the Baraisi, would say that the Pesach would have to also be left over until its face changes, until it cannot be burnt right away. So therefore, it's no proof to Rab whatsoever, right? So now the Gemara is going to say no. The Eloi Teimachi, if you don't say this, Nitmu Bala Ma'ikal Mema, then in the case where the owners became Tomei, what are you going to say? In that case, it certainly needs a conscious uprooting, because when they become Tomei, they now are required to bring a Pesach 1 month later on Yud Daled Iyar. So this animal, which they were going to bring as a Pesach on Yud Daled Nisan, can still now be carried over a month later and be brought on Yud Daled Iyar. So unless you consciously take it out of its name of a Pesach, it remains a Pesach. The Omer Rab Chiya bar Gidma, Gad Gamdov, Nizrach Mepi Chavu Burai. If the following response was advanced by the entire yeshiva, the owners became a tumah and got pushed to Pesach Sheni, so the animal itself got pushed to Pesach Sheni. It's still a perfect good. So therefore,
you need a kira.
The reason it has to be, even with it has to, what do you call it? And you see from here, even with an internal soul, an internal disqualification, it still has to wait for the face to change. It still has to wait for its meat to change. The Elamai, we've got to go back. We've got to say what we said before, which was Rabbi Yossi ben Chanai. We've got to go with the answer of Yossi ben Chanai, who said before, that somebody who slaughters a shlomim for the name of a Pesach or the name of a Chatas, it becomes possible in itself intrinsically, and therefore it needs to be burnt right away. It just doesn't need to bring a Chatas, because a Chatas we're letting off, he's going to hold like Rabbi Yeshua, that since you were doing it Tov the Bar Mitzvah, that what he called the Chatas. Hadin Allah el Dvarim, Hadin Allah el Dvarim, Hadin Allah el Dvarim. We should return to you el Dvarim. We should return to you el Dvarim. We should return to you el Dvarim. Okay, we are now on today's daf 74a1. Theoretically, we should be able to finish this daf, because this daf is a factual daf. This daf is, how do we roast the Pesach? We slaughter the Pesach, we have to roast the Pesach. We're going to have many different opinions. Do the hands and the feet, which are cut off, are they put on top of the animal and above the head of the animal and roasted on the outside of the animal like a helmet around the head of the animal? Or no, do we take the hands and the feet and do we stick it inside the animal as if we're sticking the hands and the feet in a pot? And then they're all roasted together as one. And there are different questions going back and forth about all of this. That's what this daf is all about. Okay, so I'm going to move along. It's not the most exciting daf, I will admit, but it's Torah and we have to learn it. And if I'm going too fast, please slow me down. Okay, Charlie, this is the daf. Like I said, we'll bang into a daf that we can speed up and catch up. And I think this is the one. I think we can get it done in the next 20 minutes. It says the Mishnah like this.
The B'nai Ma'ayin, the case.
Right, well, we're going to see it. We're going to
where they should be outside and not.
Right, but we got to get to it, Daddy. I'm just giving that going. Now we're going to do the Mishnah. Ketzad soilin es Pesach. How do you roast the Pesach? Okay, I slaughtered it. I did everything. Now I've got to roast it. Medid shpud shel rimon. So starting off, I take a stick, a spit. A spit is a long stick, right? A pomegranate wood. Why pomegranate wood? Why shel rimon? The Gemara is going to talk about it. And you take the stick and you stick it through the mouth all the way out the back side of the animal. Okay, hang on, of course. Hang on 1 second. Hello. Yes, thank you very much. Please let them in. Thank you. Okay, so maybe in shput shel rimon and you take the stick and you stick it into its mouth, straight through its backside. So the animal, picture in your head, is now in the middle of the spit, right? V'noisein, this is what we're talking about. V'noisein es kirov, and one takes its legs. There's b'nei meyav, and its entrails, its inside, its kishkis, which you had removed, l'soichai, inside it. You go ahead and you tuck it back in. You tuck it back into the animal. So it's not on the outside of the animal, it's stuffed. It's like it's stuffed chicken. You're stuffing back the meat back into it. Divrei Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. Rabbi Akiva says, Kemin bishul uzeh. This is like cooking. Problem, when you put the stuff back in, essentially the animal becomes like a pot in which you now put the entrails and the legs into. Since you put it into there, it's not roasting in there, it's cooking in there. The outside is getting roasted, but the inside is getting cooked. And what's the halacha about the Korban Pesach? It needs to be roasted. So it says, we hang the legs and the entrails on the outside of the carcass. Exactly how we do it, the Gemara is going to talk about it. Here we go. Goes further. Ain't soilin es a Pesach. We do not roast the Pesach. Lo yala shapud, not on a metal spit. A shpud means a spit. But every time the Gemara uses the word shpud, it always means by itself. It means a metal spit. V'loy ala skilo, and not on a grill. So no, you can't go to your backyard and take your Pesach and put it on the grill. You can't grill it. It's got to be over an open fire. So picture in your mind the old cowboy movies, right? Where they were all sitting around the campfire with the meat going around and around. Boom. That's what we're looking at. In other words, it's rotisserie Pesach. It's a rotisserie. Okay? Amar Rab Tzadok, Ma'aseh Rabbi Gamliel. There was a story with Rabbi Gamliel, Sha'amal Tavi Abdoi, who said to Tavi, his slave, Say b'tzalelu hu es Pesach ala iskala. Go and roast the Pesach for us on the grill. Rabbi Gamliel completely disagreed, and he said you could do it directly on the grill. Tavi Abdi, the Rabbi Gamliel's slave Tavi, is very famous in Shas. He was an extraordinary Frumah slave, and Rabbi Gamliel, big Talmud Chacham. And in fact, when he passed away, you're not allowed to sit shiva on a slave. But Gamliel cried on the side and all that. The Gemara brings us in other places. Anyways, Says the
He was
Gemara.
mastered him. Yeah.
He was mastered him, exactly. He gave a major eulogy on Tovi Yezebet. So, right? So says the Gemara. Here we go. Everybody strap on. We're going to try to finish this up. What's the big deal? Let him bring a spit of metal. Why do I have to use a pomegranate wood? That's the Gemara. If a metal spit is used, since part of it becomes hot, what happens with the metal? It becomes hot. When part of it becomes hot, all of it becomes hot. And therefore, it will therefore mean that the animal is being roasted on account of the heat of the metal, not the fire itself. Okay, it needs to be tzli eish, and not roasted on account of something else. I don't want to get into this, but gentlemen, if you think about this, this is amazing. According to this, if you were to put a piece of metal outside in this Florida sun and it warms up on the sun, you are theoretically allowed to put food on it on Shabbos because it's not called being cooked by fire. The heat of metal is not fire. This Gemara just said, tzli eish is fire. Heat from a metal is not fire. And what's the isser of cooking loisavashakadi? Loisavaru eish b'yom HaShabbos. You shall not kindle a fire on Yom HaShabbos. So it turns out that metal is not a fire. In fact, this is halacha, Rabbi said. When we're not allowed to turn on a light on Shabbos, is it because we're not allowed to kindle? The Chazon Ish actually says that's not the Isser. The Isser is that we're connecting a circuit. We're building a circuit. When you turn off the light, you break a circuit. When you turn on the light, you turn on a circuit. Because according to this, it's not fire. It's fascinating. The Poskim are busy with this all over Shas. What is the definition of a fire? Is LED a fire? I don't know. Is electric a fire? Not so simple. Because according to this, a fire is a fire. Just because it's hot doesn't make it a fire. Just thought you guys should know this. We're going to bang into this a lot in Shas. But this question is a question that is still debated today. Over the last 100 years, starting with the advent of Thomas Edison and electricity, this question came in. What is the actual definition of fire? Because according to this Gemara we just learned, if it becomes hot because of the metal, so it gets roasted from the heat of the metal, and that's not good. Fire. So that, and same thing by Shabbos. Okay, so this thought to put that aside. So keep going. So why does it have to be a pomegranate wood? Let it be a palm wood. Since palm wood has grooves in it, it's not smooth, it gives out liquid. And something that has liquid, as we know from many times before, something that gives liquid, it's being cooked with the liquid. It's more like being cooked, not roasted. So let's do it from fig wood. Since fig wood is hollow, it's hollow and it's filled with sap. The sap is going to come out. So then it's like being cooked. Says the Gemara, let's bring a spit of oak, carob, or sycamore. Says the Gemara, since they have knots in them, which must be cut off, the wood isn't smooth. They have knots and they have to be cut off. They secrete liquid. And if it secretes liquid, it's like cooking. Says the Gemara, the branches of a pomegranate wood also have knots in it. Says the Gemara, its knots are smooth. I'm so sorry, give me 1 second. Hello? Yes? Okay, yeah, no, I right now I can't take this phone. Can you call me back later? Thank you. Okay. I'm so sorry. Okay. The Gemara is shite kitre. The knots of a pomegranate wood are smooth and therefore don't have to be cut off. The Iba is saying Binavgo ba shata lespe kitre. We're dealing with a spit cut from a pomegranate sampling in its first year, which does not yet have any knots. It's smooth. A first year sampling is good. But the Gemara, there's the place where it's severed from the tree. You have to cut the branch off from the tree. Where you cut it off, it's going to seep liquid. It says the Gemara, the Mafidle, the Paskin Levar, that one leaves the incision sticking out of the animal. In other words, remember I said you stick it through the animal through the backside. So you make sure the side that you cut the wood is sticking outside the mouth of the animal, so it's not involved in the roasting of the animal. So now it says the Gemara, Masrisa like Rabbi Yehuda, Amish is not like Rabbi Yehuda, Titania, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda said, Kashem Shashpud Shal Eitz in an Israel, just like a wood spit is not burnt when it's inserted into the animal and placed over the fire. Kach Shabud Shel Machteches Einamar Tiach. So too, we're on 74A2. Okay, so too, a metal spit does not become hot in those circumstances and does not roast the animal with its heat. So therefore, that's not an issue according to this Tana. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to use a metal spit. You could use a metal spit. Amalai, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Zed, this metal spit, Cham miksase v'cham kulai. When part of it becomes hot, all of it becomes hot. It's a conductor. But the wooden spit, Cham miksase v'en cham kulai. Part of it becomes hot, but not all of it becomes hot.
It doesn't conduct.
Right, and therefore it doesn't conduct. And therefore you could use a wooden one, you can't use a metal one, and Rabbi Yehuda obviously not. Says the Mishnah, but noisiness kirov, if one placed its legs, right? One placed its legs and its entrails and its kishkits inside, that's what Rabbi Yisrael Galili says. Rabbi Akiva says, no, if you put it inside, it's like cooking it in a pot, and that's no good. Elamai, you put the legs and the entrails on the outside of the animal, and you cook it together with the animal from the outside. Tanya, we learned, Rabbi Yishmael Karu Tuch Tuch. Rabbi Yishmael would call the roasted Pesach offering Tuch Tuch, like the sounds of something cooking, bubbling. Rabbi Tarfur Karu Gedi Muklis. Rabbi Tarfur would call it a helmeted kid. What is a helmeted kid? By the very fact that they put the feet and the entrails around the head, it looked like there was a helmet around the animal. Tanu Rabbanon, Ezeu Gedidi Mikulis, which is the helmeted kid? The Osel El Chubulel Pesach Bizman Hazeh. Which is the helmeted kid that today on the Pesach of our Pesach, Bizman She'ein Beis Hamikdash Kayim, in the days when, unfortunately, we live in the days of the destruction of the Holy Temple, right? That we're not allowed to have the Pesach. Says Kol Shutzole Kulik Echad. Any animal that is roasted together as one unit. So Nitach Mimena Eber, if one of its limbs were cut off, Nishlach Mimena Eber, or one of its limbs was boiled, and the rest was roasted over a fire, Ein Zed Kedim Mikulis, this is not called a helmeted kid. So this that we say that the Pesach that you're not allowed to eat in nowadays is only where everything was roasted. And now you can say, even in the case where one of the limbs was cut off, even though the severed limb is now roasted together with the rest of the animal, you would say this is not a helmeted kid, and it's not a problem today. Then in that case, why do I have to bring the case of the limbs being boiled? It's enough to say that I simply cut off one of the limbs, and even if I roasted it together, it's still good. We're dealing with the case where one boiled the limb while it's still attached to the body of the animal. So for an example, he boiled one leg and he roasted the rest of the animal. If that's the case, that's not called like our regular carbon Pesach, the helmeted kid Carbon Pesach, and it's okay. You're allowed to go ahead and do it according to these mandi. Obviously, we don't hold this way, but according to these mandi amas. Amar Rabba, Hai Nilsa Sharia, a roasted animal that was stuffed with raw meat is permitted to be consumed. Okay? So Amalei Abaya, Bahal Kabbalah Dama. But if that's the case, this is, in other words, since we talked about the case of being stuffed, the Gemara is now going to go into cases of a stuffed animal. Amarabba, Hai Milsa Shaya, a roasted animal that was stuffed with raw meat is mutter to be eaten. Amalei Abaya, Kabbalah Dama, but the animal absorbed the blood of the raw animal. As you know, we salt animals. We have to salt the animals in order to get the blood out. In fact, if you ever ask a non-Jew about kosher meat, he'll say it's unbelievably salty because we're used to salty meat, but the meat, what do you call it? Because we have to get rid of the blood, and the best way to get rid of the blood is by salting it. Here's a case where you stuffed it with raw meat. The raw meat is full of blood. So and that blood is gonna seep into the animal that you stuffed it into. So the animal you stuffed it into is going to have blood in it, which is no good. Amalei, kibayloi kach paltai. Famous, just like it absorbs the blood, so that it discharges the blood. The process of the heat, which will cause the blood to boil and be absorbed into the animal, is also the process of which we take it out, which is the reason why on Pesach, before Pesach, you could do galeach. You can take your chametz-stick kais, your chametz-stick vessels, and you can boil it, right? You can boil it out, because we say the same way it went in is the same way it goes out. This, by the way, is also a musa haskel, a lesson to all of us. What goes in also comes out. What you stick in your brain is going to come out. It doesn't stay in. Kabbalah ikach polta. I heard that many times in yeshiva. Don't forget that. What goes in, what goes out. So be careful what goes in, because eventually it's coming out. Name of Messiah. Do we have a mission that supports Rabbi? Because we said that when you roast the Pesach, according to Rabbi Yosi, you place its legs and its entrails inside of it. My timer, aren't we worried about the blood? Aren't we worried about the blood that's going to be soaked from this cut off legs and entrails into the body of the Pesach? The Gemara says no proof. Since there's an incision in the neck where you slaughtered it, there's this huge incision, which is hollow, and since we face the animal downwards so that all the blood is going to pour out during the roasting. We are now on 74B1. We're on Amid Base. Let's see how far we can get in 5 minutes. Midvi diave. What will happen is that the blood will flow out. Name of Messiah, should we say we have a riot to Rabba? Halev koro, you might see a stomach. The heart. One tears it open and extracts its blood before cooking it. Loy karo, but if he didn't tear it before cooking it, you're allowed to rip it open after you cook it, and it's permitted to eat. My timer, why? What happened when it was cooking? The blood would have gotten into it. Right? Says the Gemara, no. Shani leiv the Shia. The heart is different because it's smooth. It's smooth and it doesn't absorb the blood. It doesn't, and that happens to be a fact of life. The blood does not absorb blood. It does not absorb blood. The blood goes through the heart, not into the heart. Says the Gemara of Rav and Saba. Hahu bar goizel Rav. Rav the elder breaded a certain young doe for Rav, and then he roasted it. So essentially, he grilled a dove. He breaded it with panko or whatever, with cornflakes, and he roasted it. Goes to show that even Jews then like grilled chicken or schnitzels. Even then they had schnitzels. Schnitzels has always been with Jews. If the breading is good, if it tastes good, the breading, give me some and I'll eat it. Now, the breading, you've got to go on the assumption, the bread must have absorbed some of the blood from the dough. How could it be good? So Elamai, you have to say kibole kapolta, just like it was cooked, so too it's removed. Dr. Gemara, no. Ahu b'simido. You covered the dough with breading made of fine flour, the mufrid, which is crumbly and which allows the blood to escape. But other kind of flours are more sticky and it won't allow the blood to escape, and then you have a problem. The Rabbi once went visited the Reish Galusa, the head of the Golus, and they breaded a young goose for him and roasted it. Omar, he said, hadn't I not seen that the gravy that was absorbed in the bread was clear as white glass, in other words, it was perfectly clear, I wouldn't have eaten it. Even if it wasn't clear what would be the problem, we have a rule, you see, he doesn't hold of it. He says, no proof. The breading was made out of white flour, which is firm, which is sticky, and doesn't let the blood flow out, as opposed to fine flour that would have allowed the blood to flow out. So we have no proof of Kabbalah Kapotay or not. Says the Gemara, the bread made of very fine flour, bein asmik, bein loy asmik shari, even if it turns red or doesn't turn red, it's permitted. The chibarto, when the bread is made out of white flour, izig bezuga chibar shari, if it's clear as white glass, it's permitted. Eloi osir, because it's the kind that doesn't allow for the blood to flow freely. Dishad kimochim, when the breading is made from all other types of flour, asmik osir. If it turns red, it's forbidden. Loy asmik shari. If it doesn't turn red, it's okay. Says the Gemara. Hi Malusya. This roasted animal that was stuffed with raw meat, man the osir afilu puma lesachas. The one who forbids it even if it's roasted with its opening facing downwards. That means even though logically gravity should take place and the blood should flow out, he holds no good. And the one who permits it even if you do it upwards, that the mouth of the animal is upwards. And the halacha is that even when you go upwards, you roast it upwards, but not with gravity, it's okay, it's still good, because we hold that it does flow out. And the truth in matters la halacha, we hold the way it's cooked, so too it removes. But of course there are limitations, and that we're all going to learn in Chulin in about 5 years from now. A piece of raw blood in which blood has oozed. Okay? Into which blood has oozed. Bay, the testicles. Umezrike, and the major arteries of the animals. Pligi bar Rav Acha v'Ravin, which we're going to see what that argument is in about a minute. Okay? They disagree whether they're allowed to be roasted on coals or not, and if that helps. Here we go like this. Regarding all the halachas of the Torah, we have a rule. When these Amoraim disagree, when Rav Acha and Ravina disagree, Rav Acha lechumra, Ravina lekula, where Rav Acha is the one who holds the stringent position, and Ravina holds the lenient position. Halacha ke Ravina lekula. We go according to Ravina and we take the lenient position. Lavar mehai talasa. Except in these three cases, the Rav Acha leukul, Ravina lechumra, where Rav Acha actually held the lenient view, and Ravina was the one that held the stringent view. The hilchas ke Rav Acha lekula, and the halacha is like Rav Acha for the lenient. So we always go lenient in the arguments of these two, but most of the time it's Ravina who's the lenient one. In these three cases that we're about to learn, Rav Acha was the lenient one. We pass it like him. Here's the first case. Hi unse the asmik, a piece of meat that turned red because of the oozing of blood from a vein. Chas che umalche, if one cut it and salted it, it's permitted even cooking in a pot. And we don't say that the pot holds the blood. No, the salting gets rid of the blood. If one roasts it on a spit over a fire, it's permitted for consumption. Because the blood flows out during the roasting. If one places it on hot coals, so you do an old-fashioned grill, and you fill it with coals and you roast it on top of that, there we have an argument. Chad asa v'chad shari. One asks and one says it's good. Also, the one who says also matzmi, it's heat, makes it shrivel. What does it do? It shrinks it like this, so it curls into itself. And if it curls into itself, it retains its blood, so it's no good. The one who says it's allowed says the heat draws out the blood. The hilchas that halacha is that he does draw out the blood, and you're allowed to grill it on a coal grill. Next case, same thing with the testicles. And if one cut and salted them, they're permitted in a pot. And if you suspend it on a spit for roasting, they're good. Meat to have because the blood flows out during roasting. If one put them on hot coals, the testicles on hot coals, Rav and the Rabbeinu disagree. One says no good, one says good. Also, one who says no good, meats with it makes it shrivel, so the blood is retained in the testicles. The other one who permits it says no, the heat draws it out. In the case of the major arteries of the neck. If one cuts it and salts it, it can be cooked in a pot. If one puts it on a spit, and he positions the place where the slaughter was done, the cut of the neck, facing downward, shari. Over here, you need that because the neck is filled with blood. That's where the major arteries are. So you have to make sure that it's facing downwards. Then it's good. Mida daha, because then the blood will flow out. But if you put it on coals, one says it's also, one says it's good. The one who says it's also matzmi, it's amitz, says that the heat makes it shrivel. We're on 74b3. Uman the shari nishiv shadi, and the one who permits it says the heat draws it out. Va'alocha the nishiv shadi, says the Gemara, hi unsma damasik, this piece of meat that turned red because of the blood coming out of a vein. How they also its gravy is also loy asvik, if the gravy did not turn red. Chal Yeshavi, the gravy is permitted. Rabbeinu Amar afilu loy masik nabi, even if the gravy doesn't turn red, Chal also its gravy is also. The less base sharuki damia. It's not possible that some blood didn't get mixed up into the gravy. Amalei Mar Baramema Ravashi, Marame said to Ravashi, Abba Mangile Agune, my father Amema used to swallow it. Like the Amri Ravashi Gupe Minanile Agume. Ravashi himself used to swallow it. Also, he said, if you don't see it red, the gravy is good, and we're good to go. Great, everybody. We got to the bottom. We are now on the daf. We're up to Amalei Mar Baramema Ravashi. This is where we're going to stop.